So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I'm going to start by sharing a bit about what leads, one of the things that has me so inspired to do the work that I do right now. And it goes back to when I was in school studying naturopathic medicine and took a year off to live and teach in Thailand. And so this was about 20 years ago. And a dear friend of mine in Thailand came to me one day and she said, Dr. Rachel. And she was in this panic. And I said, what's going on? She said, I think I'm dying. And I thought, oh my goodness, it was so extreme. She was so panicked. And I said, okay, why don't you tell me what's going on? Let's sit down. And she was probably 20 years older than me at the time, which puts her around my age now, somewhere in her later 40s. And she said, I can't focus. I can't think. My heart is going so fast. My hands are sweaty. And she just felt tingly and hot. And she just couldn't figure out what was going on. She felt like she was going to pass out, or she felt like she was going to die. And so I asked her a little bit more about it. And, how does it start? And does it just end? And because she was saying, it keeps happening. And then we talked about hot flashes. And essentially I told her what hot flashes are, and that they, in my understanding, this happens in women at this phase of life. And she'd never heard of it, had no idea. And I don't know if that's because we were in Thailand and women aren't having the same experience around menopause and perimenopause as people in North America. I don't know if it's because what happened here? Sorry, folks. Bear with me for a second. Let's see if this helps. I don't know if it's because just culturally, they didn't talk about it. Sorry, let me pause here. I'm letting someone else in and I'm trying to figure out why I can't full screen here. That's not what I want to do. But either way, what took me by surprise was that she was explaining these hot flashes that she was having, and she had no idea what it was. And what I see in my practice and in the programs that I run, and it's part of what inspires me to do what I do today, is this, what I've observed over the past almost 20 years that I've been practicing, that when women understand what's going on in their bodies, they are so much more empowered to make the changes that help them feel better, to like I said, understand what's going on and to embrace all the different phases of life that we have, because you're more in tune with where your body's at. So fast forward 20 years, just the other day, I had Meredith in my office. And she came to see me a little while back with some concerns around mood and around anxiety. And one of her follow-ups, she had said, you gave me this supplement and it was for digestion. And I haven't taken it. I haven't even opened it because I looked at the bottle and I thought, I don't have digestive problems. I don't even know why you gave this to me. And so I explained to her that digestion plays we talked about the role that digestion plays in hormone balancing, how the bacteria in your gut are responsible for making, and the gut houses so many of the neurotransmitters that play a role in your mood, and that was behind supporting the gut, that the more we can do to nourish the digestive system helps with balancing hormones, helps with anxiety, helps with mood, but that connection just hadn't been clear in the previous visit. So that made sense. And she started using the supplement, and then it made so much more sense to her why she was doing it. So it's always my goal to have you not only know the things to do, or have my patients and my program participants know the things to do, but to know the why behind them. And that's why I love the teaching part. And it made such a difference for her to start on those digestive supplements and the digestive support and see such improvement. So my goal in this webinar is to share more than knowledge, more than take this for that, but to give you some insight into my experience. I've had the honor, the pleasure of working with women, like I said, almost 20 years now. And I've had the chance to see so much of what works and what doesn't. And I want to share that insight. I'm excited to share that insight with you. So we're going to have time for questions and discussion at the end, but I encourage you to use the chat. Like I said, I'm going to do my best to keep my eye on the chat box. And let me open it up here. And we'll use that as a way to communicate. So just make sure when you're putting stuff into the chat that you're sending it to everyone and not just me as the host, because I might not see it. So take a minute, throw into the chat box. Galen already started, but let me know whatever feels comfortable. But I want to speak to you and who you are. So if you can tell me who you are in terms of, are you a woman in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s? Are you a mother? Are you a teacher? Are you a songwriter? You know, an entrepreneur? Are you busy? Are you bored? Just a couple of words to describe where you're at in life so that I can speak to you. So take a second to throw that into the chat, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Rachel VandenBerg. As you know, I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm also an educator. I'm the creator of Women's Health Online. That's where I run my online programs. I'm also a mom, a wife and a mom. I've got 3 kids, and I'm a woman in perimenopause. So for those of you who are also with me, sometime maybe anywhere from your late 30s to your early 50s in this phase of life where our hormones are shifting around all over the place, I'm there with you. Kindergarten teacher, 45 years old, in my 30s, mom of 2, bonus mom of 2, and a full-time teacher. Okay, so we're busy. No kids believe I'm in perimenopause. Yeah, you probably are. You know, not for me to know for sure, but at 45. So we're kind of all in the same range here, those of us who have answered, and this is great. This is exactly who I work with in my practice. So this is perfect. What I'm going to do is share my screen so that a picture is worth 1,000 words here. So let's get into slideshow. And let's talk about what's up with your hormones. So before I jump too far into this, into this next slide, throw into your chat now, into the chat now, what inspires you to be here, to take some time out of your Saturday morning? Why is mastering your hormones important to you right now? Is there something that, and often this is a word or two, it's a symptom maybe, is there something that you're experiencing that inspires you to be here? Sleep through the night, free of hot flashes. Right, so feel better so that the family runs more smoothly. Yeah. So let's say words like insomnia, hot flash, feeling better, brain fog. Let's take those words and now answer again with the same answer, but turn it positive. So instead, the reason for this is because it's so much nicer to think about the positive, about where you're going, rather than the symptoms you want to resolve, right? So it might seem nitpicky or semantics, but if we think about where we're going rather than what's holding us back, it's a wonderful, it feels different. So give it a try. So instead of insomnia, sleeping through the night. Instead of hot flashes, maybe feeling a stable temperature over the day. Instead of dreadful periods, What might describe where you're going to? Yes, Valerie, a common story. And I can speak to that for sure as we move on here. Smooth digestion, feel through the night, sleep through the night. Yeah, wake up rested, have a clear head. Doesn't that feel better to talk about where you're going to rather than what's holding you back? Yeah, okay, awesome. So let's take a look at what's going on with your hormones. And then we're gonna get back to these thoughts, so hold on to them. So have a look. I think that someone might be unmuted. Galen, I think you unmuted. Can I mute you just so that I'm just hearing a clicking in the background, and that might be what it is. Okay. So I think that you can see my cursor. Can you guys see my cursor? Someone throw in the chat. Yeah, okay, perfect. So here we are. This is assuming, and I realize this is not everyone's story. In fact, more often than not, I don't see the typical 28-day cycle, but it helps us to give us some framework to talk about a 28-day menstrual cycle. So look here at the beginning. This is day one, just so we're all on the same page. Day one is the first day of bleeding. So this is when your period starts. Spotting doesn't count. It's day one, the first day of flow. So this lower part of the, illustration here shows the lining, the thickness of the lining of your uterus. So what's going on here for the first, in this graph, in this illustration, it's about 7 days, is your lining is shedding. So it's going down, right? Take a look at this gray line here, because here are two of your key player hormones. Your estrogen and progesterone are pretty low on day one, and then your estrogen starts to go up and up and up. And when it gets to a critical point, it causes this to happen, this that we see above it. And that's called the release of FSH and LH, LH and FSH. And that triggers this, which is ovulation. So here we've got this egg growing. And here in this moment, once it's triggered by the LH and the FSH spiking up that make this whole thing happen, we get this release of an egg. And what's really key here is that this shell that the egg was in changes. And it becomes this. It becomes this yellow blob, in case people watching the recording can't see the cursor. It becomes this yellow blob. So where we are is middle of the page, we're seeing that egg just ovulated and we see this yellow blob. And that yellow blob is called the corpus luteum. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that this makes progesterone. So let's go back to this estrogen progesterone line. And we see that now that we've ovulated, the progesterone starts to go up and up and up. And you need that progesterone in order to support fertility, right? This whole thing is all about supporting fertility and reproduction. Even if that's not your intent, that's your body's intent in this cycle. And so eventually this starts to break down. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. That's the corpus luteum getting smaller, and the progesterone level goes back down. So this here is naturally what happens to your estrogen and progesterone through the course of the month. So already, even just looking at this, you can see we've got up and down and up and down, and we've got one high and one low, and then we've got both high, and then we've got them both. By the end, everything's dropped down again. And that causes it all to start over again at day one. So the key is that you need to ovulate to make that progesterone. If you don't ovulate, that second half doesn't happen in the same way. And for those of us who have said we're in our 40s-ish, give or take right now, the reality of life is that our eggs are not as robust when we're in our 40s as they were when we were in our 20s. And so sometimes the egg doesn't make that much progesterone, and so, or the shell, sorry. And sometimes we don't ovulate at all, which means sometimes our month looks like this. Sometimes it looks different because you don't get that purple rise in progesterone in the second half of the cycle. And so not only are you shifting through your monthly cycle, but you're shifting from one month to the next. And that can feel uncomfortable, for lack of a better word, because what causes symptoms is when hormones are out of balance with each other. So often it's not necessarily that that we can just look at the value of one hormone, but we want to look at the value of that relative to the others because that's what causes symptoms. So for example, when you have way more estrogen than progesterone, either it could be that your estrogen is super high and your progesterone is super low, or maybe your estrogen and progesterone are both high, but estrogen's higher. It's that relativity to each other that matters. And that causes, well, it all matters, but that causes the majority of the symptoms. So when we've got so much fluctuating, like we do when our cycle's not the same every month and even varies through the month, that's where we get symptoms. So we might see things like high estrogen. This is really common, especially in our 40s or after having kids when this shift happens. Because if you don't ovulate, you've got super high estrogen relative to your progesterone. So the comment about having first shorter, lighter periods, no PMS, really great sleep, and suddenly now being in this place where there are fibroids. Fibroids are so related to having high estrogen levels. So fibroids, heavy periods, also common with high estrogen relative to your progesterone. And when your estrogen's high and your progesterone's low, when you don't have enough progesterone, especially right in that second half of the cycle, you tend to be restless, agitated at night. Often you're having to find enough time falling asleep, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and it's really hard to get back to sleep. So a lot of, and if you had the chance to do the self-assessment before joining this webinar, then what you might notice is that box, oh my gosh, I think it's box number 3, but I have to double check my notes. Box number 3 is often correlated with high estrogen levels. High estrogen, besides all this, and I'm digressing just a little bit here, but I want to throw out there this concept because high estrogen is so common, especially, like I said, in women in their 40s. And I see here, I'm catching up on comments that yes, some are certainly over 40s. We've got someone here who's in their 60s, and that's awesome. So that's the next phase, and we'll talk about that too. The high estrogen is also can be exacerbated by our diet, our lifestyle, our genetics, the environment that we're in. I cover all this in more detail, in lots of detail in my program. We can't dive that deep today, but it's worth knowing that happens. So often what we see with high estrogen and what we see with low progesterone is alongside of that, we see low progesterone. And here, some hints that you might be erring into that low progesterone. So that means either not ovulating or making eggs that are not as robust. And so you're just not making as much progesterone. We start seeing that waking in the night, a different kind of PMS that's often, sort of an insomnia, irritability kind of PMS, and classic of low progesterone is spotting. So over time, to speak to those who have been there, done this perimenopause phase, and now likely what's happened is the estrogen is lower too. So this whole phase of perimenopause, which is like the 10 years before menopause, 10 years, give or take. For some people, it's 5. For some people, it might be more than 10, where things are in flux. And then we reach this place where estrogen and progesterone are all low. And what we see there is that then we're more concerned with things like vaginal dryness, perhaps with bone health, which you can't see, but you can down the road if you have an easier susceptibility to fractures. And so we want to look at all those and addressing that. because we do rely on these hormones for our comfort. What we need is just for them to be in balance with each other. Are there questions so far? 100%. Fall asleep, no problem. Probably running around all day. Easy to crash in bed at night, but gosh, it's tough when you wake up in the morning, wee hours of the morning. Okay, so some of the key points here. We get symptoms when our hormones are out of balance. I think I've made that pretty clear. We need to ovulate to make progesterone. Sometimes we ovulate, sometimes we don't if we're in our perimenopausal years. And because our eggs are naturally less robust over time, sometimes even when we do ovulate, we just don't get that superpower progesterone, burst in the second half of the cycle. And that can have some of us feeling kind of crummy. And estrogen and progesterone, my friends, is not the whole story. So estrogen and progesterone hence this megaphone, talk quite loudly to almost our whole bodies. I touched on and I don't even have that on this list here, but the bone health. So these hormones are so important for our bone health and our cardiovascular health. You will see that on a slide later. The hormones that they tend to talk to, cortisol, which helps us deal with stress, thyroid, which helps us have energy, insulin, which helps us regulate our blood sugar. So think of not only are the estrogen and progesterone in flux, but the hormones that do these things, that help us cope with stress, that give us our energy, that balance our blood sugar, are getting almost like different messages from the estrogen and progesterone because those levels are constantly changing. And so it's like telling your cortisol to be high and then not high and then high and then not high. And we end up with flux all over the place, right? So when I think about our hormones, and there are so many more, there's so many more than these three, than the cortisol, the thyroid, and the insulin, but these are the big ones. And these are the big ones that I see most often in my practice, and my practice focuses mostly on women's health around this perimenopausal and menopausal stage of life. That said, if you're here or if you're listening and you're like, I'm in my early 30s, this absolutely relates to you, partly because, I'm going to digress for a second here, but partly because when I've had women in my program who, and at first it used to surprise me, I'd be like, you're 63 and you want to take my program for perimenopause? And they did. So I said, great, sure. And what the 63-year-old women appreciated was learning what had happened. And that was empowering to go, oh my gosh, I wasn't going crazy. This is real. And also what I heard from every single one of the women who's already been through menopause and has taken my program is, I wish I knew this when I was in my 30s. Why didn't anyone tell me this 20 years ago is what I hear all the time. So you want to know this in your 30s because that is so empowering. Okay, estrogen and progesterone talk to each other. And if you could see my air quotes talk. So let's go back to, I don't know, I called this grade 3 science the other day. I really don't remember when. I learned about ecosystems and food webs, probably in lots of different years. But let's look at this picture and tell me what you think. Throw it into the chat. What would happen if we suddenly, magically, for whatever reason, all the frogs disappeared? What would happen to the ecosystem? What would happen to the bugs and the owls and the snakes? I'm going to look for your answers in my chat here. So suddenly, in this balanced ecosystem, the frogs are gone. The snakes and owls would be hungry for sure. And probably the snake and owl populations would go down, which would mean the hawk gets hungry. And what might happen to the birds? If there's not as many snakes eating the birds, the bugs would proliferate. Yes, exactly. So there'd be tons of bugs. Snakes, owls, and hawks would go hungry. The populations would decrease. Absolutely. So this is what's happening, kind of, in our bodies when just gonna let someone else in, when we see that our hormones are fluxing all over the place and in our bodies that we're not that than the natural ecosystem. So if we lost all the frogs. If suddenly our progesterone isn't there this month and it was last month, what does that do to all the other hormones that it talks to? It puts them in flux. They either go up or go down, or right? And so we get symptoms. So the whole take home in that is that the natural hormone changes that are normal and common, and they're supposed to happen to us. Our estrogen levels, our progesterone levels are supposed to decline over time. The goal is to keep them in balance with each other and to take the edge off so that we can feel better through the process. But because all our hormones talk to each other, the estrogen and progesterone, that maybe until now, often until I start working with them, women think of estrogen and progesterone as affecting their periods, which they do, but also this whole list here. So they affect your mood, your sleep, your energy, your metabolism, anxiety, which often I see women in their 40s and they say, I have this anxiety that I never used to have before. And as we move further through, we feel, and the estrogen and progesterone levels just altogether lower, we see more risk of cardiovascular concerns, so heart health, bone health, cognitive function. So the whole take-home message is that so much of this is about those shifting reproductive hormones. So what I'm sharing with you in this slide is this is kind of over the 18 years that I've been in practice. This has kind of evolved and developed. And this is the methodology that I use when I'm working with a patient one-on-one. And I can do that with any patients here in Ontario. You can see me in my one-on-one practice. Those of you who are not in Ontario, we go through a similar process as a group in the program. So, and people in Ontario are also welcome to the programs. We start off with a phase that I call discovery. So that's where we get to know each other. We sit together either virtually or in person if you happen to be in Kitchener-Waterloo area. And we talk about what you're experiencing. We talk about what life was like 20 years ago, 10 years ago or more, so that we have a good picture of where you're at now and what your health history is like. Often we requisition some lab work to get an idea of where your physiology is at. And then as quickly as we can, we jump into some primary care. I call this phase putting out the fires. When someone comes to see me and says, I have hot flashes and I can't function through the day because I'm, out of sorts when I'm hot and I'm taking off layers and putting on layers and it's affecting quality of life. What we really need to do is get rid of those hot flashes. When someone's not sleeping at night, we need to help them sleep at night so that they can then do the other things. And those other things are the foundational pieces. And the foundational pieces are where the magic happens. And this is what helps us get results that last. Once we have the foundations in place, we can often do without or minimize our use of supplements and nutrients that we've used in primary care to put out the fires. And then we can focus on longevity, which is our maintenance phase. I forgot to switch slides here for a little bit. So this is me in my office doing an initial assessment with someone. I mean, I'm not actually, but pretending in this photo that I'm doing an initial assessment with someone. Then we talk about, sometimes we use Band-Aid solutions. Sometimes this is where we take, a fairly high dose maybe of nutrients or herbs to put out the fires so that we can focus then on these foundational pieces. So I just talked about how that happens in my one-on-one practice. When you work with me in a group program, we start off with the tools to do your own self-assessment. So what I sent out when you signed up for this webinar is one part of that. Then we begin the program, we open the program by looking at our goals, looking where we're going, having the tools to do your own assessment so that you know where to focus through the program. And the program then moves into these foundational pieces, because we need to be sleeping well, we need to be eating good food, we need to be moving our bodies, we need our detoxification, our stress management. We need all of that set up. And we do that in manageable, small step ways through the program so that you get results that last. And really, I often use this, the analogy of building a house, because I use the analogy of a foundation. When you build a house, you've got to put it on a solid foundation. If you just put up some walls and a roof, you're not going to get much shelter in the cold winter when the snow flies, right? You need to put it on a solid foundation. You need something that lasts. So let me tell you a bit about Mary. By the way, when I tell you about Mary or Meredith or anyone else, I am changing the name, and the story is real. I'm telling real stories, but I change them enough that you can't identify who they are. So I'm changing their name, I'm changing their story enough that if Mary sounds exactly like your next door neighbor, that's a coincidence. So Mary was tired, she was crying. She was crying in my office. She was crying at work. She was finding that her motivation was low, and that was so unusual for her because she was used to being full of energy and full of life. She was in her mid 40s and she was having a hard time coping. She would work all day, push through the evening, drive her kids to all their things, and then she'd be exhausted and maybe or maybe didn't sleep at night. Mary had a lot of pieces. We knew that her progesterone was low. We also knew that she had a lot of stress. She liked her job. She loved her job, but it was taxing. And because of the nature of her work, she did a lot of last minute problem solving, which meant she was always on. So she was kind of always in this fight or flight place. Then she'd come home, not have a break, come home to her kids, who of course she loved her kids and her family, but it was taking her energy. And she was frustrated because she was taking some supplements for energy, but they weren't helping. Or they'd help a little bit and then not entirely. So Mary ended up taking my program, and through that, she learned more about how progesterone talks to her other hormones. And this was specific for her because she realized that her progesterone was low. So what she learned was that when her progesterone was low, her cortisol goes up. And when she's stressed, her cortisol goes up. She also learned about the connection between progesterone and her mood. So she realized that what was probably happening is she's having low grounding sleeping hormones like progesterone and high stress hormones. And so what she didn't need was supplements that help her with her energy, even though she was tired. What she needed was to work on her stress management. And so for her, that meant tools to get that cortisol, that stress hormone, down. And when she did that, she could sleep at night. And then, honestly, she had energy all day and she enjoyed her time in the evening with her family. She was happy, she was motivated, and she was loving life again. And this is where what she found was that when she could then focus on these foundational pieces. So for her, stress management was so key. But then when she looked at, she could start using some strategic changes in her diet because she had the energy to do that. She could support her digestion and detoxification. And then, this was probably about a year ago. So for now, anyway, she's stable and seeing these results that last. Sarah was similar. She was tired. And so she was really working on her sleep. She had a great routine before bed. She had done quite a bit of reading and recognized the importance of a good routine before bed. She was taking melatonin to help with sleep, and she was frustrated because, again, she wasn't seeing the results that she expected from what she was reading online or in books. What she didn't know about melatonin is that melatonin is typically not the nutrient you're looking for to go back to sleep. So remember how we talked earlier about falling asleep is not a problem, but going back to sleep when you wake up in the wee hours of the morning is the trick. Melatonin usually doesn't help with this. Melatonin can also have a paradoxical effect, which means it has the opposite effect in a small part of the population than it does in most of the population. For most of us, it helps us get to sleep at night. For some people, it makes them awake. That is just genetic. There's not much you can do about it. There are some herbs that do that as well. Valerian, some people just have the opposite effect, and it's a genetic thing. There are some contraindications. What Sarah didn't know and what she hadn't read in all her reading about melatonin is that it can exacerbate autoimmune conditions. Melatonin also has an effect on estrogen. So we can use this strategically, but it's worth knowing. And these are the things that, that Sarah learned when we started working together. And when she took my program, she found that she realized that she was doing the right things, in air quotes, but they weren't the right things for her. And so what she needed was the specificity. When you're doing something specific for you, she has stopped taking, I think she stopped taking the melatonin altogether. She realized that she was missing some of the key components to a restorative sleep. So again, she, at first when we started talking about the foundational pieces, she was like, I'm doing those things. But then we talked about what she was actually doing. She had a pretty good lifestyle around sleep, but not necessarily some key pieces that helped her get a restorative sleep so that she can actually feel amazing in the morning. And for her, this was life-changing. I'm pretty sure Sarah was also using some herbs strategically to help her sleep. All of this together was helping her wake up feeling good, which you can imagine is so life-changing, right? So some of you are going to look at these foundational pieces and say, either, yeah, I'm doing this. And I don't know who here participated in the hormone reboot challenge that I ran just over a month ago or around a month ago. And we covered on some of these pieces. And part of actually what motivated me to put this webinar together was some of the feedback I got from that, where people had done a self-assessment and had check boxes maybe all over the place or in one or two places, and then did the hormone reboot challenge and said, I'm doing those things. Like, I know I need to sleep. I'm trying to eat well. And my response to that is, that's okay. You've got a great start. You're in a place where you need to dive in deeper, right? And for those of you who are like, oh my gosh, this is a long list, that's okay too. What might help you is having the strategic order so that you know where to start, because a list that's as long as that can be overwhelming. So what people have literally asked me is, can't I just Google all this? And maybe you can tell from Sarah and from Mary that you don't get it all when you Google. But another thing is, are you getting the reliable information? Are you getting the information that is specific to you? So you might read a lot about melatonin, but you don't tend to read that much about melatonin and the paradoxical effect, or the people who might not benefit from melatonin, or it could make them worse. So I see often women coming into my practice kind of looking like this and saying, I've put so much time and so much money into taking supplements and they don't work. And it's so frustrating. So don't give me supplements, give me something else. And I heard this analogy the other day and I loved it. It's like someone jumping into a pool or into the lake and flailing around and saying, I tried swimming, it doesn't work. To which any of you who know how to swim or even know the concept of swimming will say, well, it's not just about moving your limbs. It's about moving your limbs in a strategic way, in the right order. It's not that swimming doesn't work. It's that you need to do it right. So are you getting the order right? And that is a thing that's really hard to Google, partly because the order is going to be different for many of us. But order is super important because sometimes, okay, let me give you another example. Did I put another example here? No. Because it's specific to you. So if, for example, you start taking some supplements to balance your estrogen, maybe you did the self-assessment and you see that your box 3 was high and that, that suggests probably your estrogen level is high. Or maybe you have fibroids or heavy bleeding and you're like, yeah, I've read about this. Google tells me, or, my lab work tells me that my estrogen is high. But then you go to the store and you look for some supplements that help to lower estrogen levels, which is great. There are lots of natural ways we can do that. But if you get the order wrong, if you don't know that for you, what you really need to do is first focus on digestion, because as your liver breaks down estrogen, it dumps it into your digestive system so that it can leave the body. And so if you don't work on digestion before supporting your liver in breaking down your estrogen, you can actually make it worse because you can end up reabsorbing that estrogen. So again, we dive much deeper into this concept in the program. The idea here is that you need the strategy of working in the right order. And so another thing that we do in the program is we have this toolkit that I've created so that over the course of 6 weeks, what the women in the program are doing is making a plan so that we get the order right. The other thing you don't get from Google is the community. And this is where, this is some of the feedback that I've had from other women, where they get lots of good, valuable information. Mel referred to the program as therapeutic, which I was actually really touched to hear that. She became a part of a group where she could relate in one way or another. So she got a scientific way to help and support her body and her hormones that she wouldn't have known to research for herself. And she found a space where she was a part of a group where she was safe and accepted. What I really found beneficial, or what Steph really found beneficial, was the group feeling and the opportunity to discuss and ask questions, which is partly why I put a webinar like this together, so that in a few minutes we'll have the chance to talk and ask questions and share experiences with each other. Not only having the opportunity to learn about the science around hormonal imbalance, the importance of all these foundational pieces, but to engage with like-minded and diverse individuals who empowered Lana to better be true to her health. So the take-home message here is that in this, you can see this already because you're one of some other women who came out today. You're not alone. You're not alone in your symptoms. You're also not crazy. Oh my gosh, so many women come to see me, especially in my practice or in our group discussions, and they say, I'm having this. They might even say it kind of sheepishly. I remember one woman who was finally said, she said, I have cold flashes. Everyone's talking about hot flashes. I have cold flashes. Yeah, that's possible. And someone else said, me too. And both of them were like, oh, this huge relief going, okay, I kind of thought I was crazy. Turns out I'm not crazy. It's normal physiology. So my question for you, let's go back to those answers you threw into the chat a while ago when you said clear head, consistent emotions, patience, sleeping through the night, smooth digestion. All of these you can get from balancing your hormones. So what impact would it have if you were to master your hormonal balance, if you were to reach that point of a clear head, consistent emotions, whatever it is for you? What effect would that have on your life? So you're welcome to throw that into the chat again. Positive impact on daily life, on yourself, yeah, and everyone around you. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. For me, sometimes it's my sleep. And my gosh, a good night's sleep makes such a difference in my energy the next day, right? It seems so obvious, but it's so, it makes such a huge difference. Empowerment, knowing what is going on in your body scientifically is so empowering. Yeah, for sure. So empowerment, absolutely. Okay, so for those of you who want to dive deeper, and some people are going to be like, this was enough, great, thank you, awesome. And that's great if it was. Some of you are going to be looking to dive a bit deeper. And for those of you, if you want to do that through the group program, I always like to throw in a little bit about who the program is for. And so there are different streams. There's one stream more towards the what I call period repair. Both are fairly similar, but period repair is a little less focused on the actual perimenopausal transition, and the perimenopause program, of course, is more for women, usually around in their 40s, but sometimes as early as their late 30s, for sure, focusing on those perimenopausal years. So you're eligible, you're ready for this if you have a goal. And I know that you have a goal because you told them to me, you told them to everyone just a few minutes ago, that you decide that you're ready. So really the honest truth of it all is that it takes work to look at your nutrition and your lifestyle. And if you're ready to do it and you can commit, then you're ready. So whatever came out on that self-assessment, if you've got one box that you're like, oh yeah, it's clear that this is about my progesterone, or oh yeah, it's clear that my estrogen is low, or I've got check marks all over the place, that's okay too. It probably just means that things have been going on for a while, and that those check marks all over the place are because all your hormones talk to each other. Way back to that ecosystem slide, right? Now, some people are saying, yeah, but I'm tired. I don't have the energy. I'm overwhelmed with life. And for you, that's one of the first things we work on, is how are we going to make this doable? So one of the first things we step into after that discovery phase for so many of us, it's about working on that stress management, time management, energy part of it, so that you can do the other things. That's like the fire that we need to put out so that we can work on those foundational pieces. So we just talked about what impact it would have if you were to master hormone balance. Now I'm going to ask you another question as we wrap up here. How would that feel? And one of you already touched on it when you said empowering. I'm trying to scroll through the chat again here. Positive impact. So how does that feel? How does it feel to be, oh, I think empowered is a feeling actually. How does it feel to have energy, to have a clear head? You know, what is the feeling behind that? So I'm going to give you comforting. Thank you. Yeah, great feedback. Give a couple more people a chance to throw in if you want to talk about the feeling that comes up when you think about that restful sleep, that clear head, that even patience, right? And then let's just review some of the key points here. And then what I'm going to do is stop recording so that we can have a group discussion that's not being recorded. So some of the key points. One is that our hormones fluctuate. They just do. They fluctuate every month. They fluctuate month to month, more and more as we get closer to menopause, and then less and less in our menopausal years when they're actually all on the low side. It happens every month. It gets a bit more extreme as we work up towards menopause, and then they all taper off. But our hormones fluctuate and they affect, I think that's the next one, our hormones affect each other, right? So it's not just about estrogen and progesterone. They affect so many other things, and that's why our stress plays such a key role. That's why our bone health and our heart health is so affected post-menopause when our hormone levels are low. That the foundational pieces are essential, that the order matters, that swimming works. I promise, swimming works, and that you are not alone. So I hope those are some of the key take homes that you get from this. And I'm going to stop recording.